One of the least common mechanics I ever see in casts or in games really that I play is the sacrifice mechanic for the Aeon. Today, we're going to be taking a look at that, what it is, how it's used, why you should use it, why you shouldn't use it, and all the other good stuff that y'all have come to know and love in the science videos. All right, so first off, let's talk about what it is. Part of this is because the Aeon is the least played faction. Another portion is that it's not very efficient. And lastly, I'm not quite sure how many people actually know about this mechanic. Whenever it was suggested, there was a little bit of confusion between like some of the people that I was in the Discord call with, and some people didn't know what it was. So this was suggested by one of the guys in our Discord. And there was not an insignificant amount of people that didn't know what it was. So I'll give you a quick summary of what it is if you don't know. In a nutshell, it's a mechanic that you can use for engineers. It's also an upgrade available for support command units. The upgrade is not tied to a template though out of the Quantum Gateway, so you'll need to manually select the upgrade on your SACUs. It's not a very expensive upgrade, only costing 150 mass for the upgrade. This makes it, I think, the cheapest, if not, or one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest upgrade, but it is something you'll have to manually upgrade. So what it is, sacrificing units will have them sacrifice themselves for whatever project is under construction, instantly progressing its construction. So it's a way, instead of having units build whatever it is that you're trying to build, you can click sacrifice and they will essentially consume themselves towards progressing the greater good of everything. So with this, it's possible to instantly build something like a Galactic Colossus, or really any other building or experimental that you might want to build. So pretty interesting mechanic, unique to the Aeon. With that, let's get into the numbers. Now, one of the real big reasons you don't see this very much is because of the efficiency. You don't get the same amount of mass or energy that you put into the engineers or the SACUs that translates into the building. So you suffer a penalty for using the sacrifice functionality. And I'll throw the multipliers up here on the screen. The SACU has a 0.9 multiplier and all the other engineers have a 0.6 multiplier. So this means that you get 90% of an SACU's mass and energy applied and 60% of an engineer's cost applied whenever you're actually building, assuming my math and what I'm reading out of the unit blueprint and GitHub is correct. So for something like a T3 engineer that costs 312 mass, if I'm remembering correctly, and doing some really quick and rough math, that comes out to roughly about 184 mass, something like that, that you get actually applied to whatever it is that you're sacrificing. So we're just using that as an example. Before we continue, I just really want to give a huge thanks to the FAF team that make all of these blueprints publicly available in GitHub. The unit database that's in the UI is really great, but for some of the more obscure things like the sacrifice multiplier, those aren't actually listed in the unit database, which completely makes sense because there's only so much you can put into that UI without making it completely non-understandable. Similar to the way that I just said non-understandable, which is a very not understandable way to communicate, but I digress wildly. I would like to see the unit stats for the various SACU presets put into the UI based database like RAS, Rambo, Shield, etc. But that's a pretty small gripe with the tool I have. And I and many others have found this really helpful. But ultimately, trying to figure out this multiplier with trial and error would have absolutely sucked. So thank you so much for putting that into the unit database, into the GitHub unit blueprints, and making those public, because it made my job a lot easier for this particular video. So in practice, I did a couple of tests with Tech 3 engineers and with SACUs with the sacrifice upgrade on things that you might really want to quickly build whenever you're panicking, like I so often do. So some of the examples would be a GC, Tech 2 point defense, and Tech 3 SAMs. So the GC, it takes 16 SACUs with the sacrifice upgrade, or it takes 384 Tech 3 engineers, which is a laughably high number. The Tech 2 point defense is a good one because if you're panicking, you've got a quick monkey lord that's bearing down on you, or you didn't really pay attention and there's a teleport snipe coming in and you need to quickly build some point defense. It goes without saying here that you only need one SACU to build a Tech 2 point defense using sacrifice. And then you need 4 engineers to do this without, or you need to do this with 4 engineers to instantly build it. So this one much more reasonable. You know, if you need to get 5 or 6 of these up, it's not out of the realm of possibility for somebody who's panicking to have, you know, 12, 15, 18 T3 engineers, assuming they're decently into the Tech 3 phase. And then the last one is Tech 3 SAMs. Again, single SACU, and then you're going to need 9 Tech 3 engineers. In practice, you can get away with less because you don't have to commit to sacrificing. You can partially build it, and then say if it's halfway done, you can, using the Tech 3 SAMs as an example, if you halfway build it normally, you can then sacrifice 5 engineers or 5 Tech 3 engineers to finish it the rest of the way. But those are the numbers associated if you're going to be building it from the ground up. Now, it should also be noted that you don't get extra mass by upgrading your SACUs. So the multiplier only applies to the base cost of the SACU. So upgrading it with something like Teleporter, for example, doesn't mean you can use fewer SACUs to insta-build something like, oh, I don't know, maybe like a Galactic Colossus, something like that. So with that, let's get into why we don't see this mechanic and when it might be good to use them. So obviously, there's a huge meme around this, and I've alluded to it already, but we can see it in lower level games, and I've used it also myself in one of my very early games, where you can upgrade your SACUs with Teleport, then TP into an enemy player's base to insta-build a GC. This is really kind of a meme, I think. There's better ways to use your mass normally in a game, which is why you don't really see it that often outside of in lower rated games or in games where people are just clowning. So I really only think if we're going to take this meme and give it some credibility and try and lend some credibility to it, I really think that this is only useful in on a map like a Dual Gap or Astro Crater or Thermo, one of those maps that are very choke pointy and turtley in nature, where things are just so locked down that there's no way that you can possibly break through a line. But even in those situations, oftentimes nukes or Tech 3 artillery are going to be more effective. But I think that if you're gonna go for this strategy, like you really want to use this strategy, those are the maps that make the most sense to use the teleport insta build GC kind of strategy. Now, by and large, I don't think this is an effective way to build experimentals for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, and the biggest one, is it takes an obscenely large number of engineers to the point where you're spending a ton of mass on engineers, and the pathfinding doesn't help at all either. Like, to build 384 Tech 3 engineers, that's like a lot of factories making T3 engineers for a really long time. I can't do that math in my head that quickly. And because I scripted this out and didn't prepare that particular thing, you're going to suffice it to say that there's a lot. It's going to take a lot of factories a long time to build 384 Tech 3 engineers. It can make a little bit more sense if you're using SACUs, but you'd still need 16 of those bad boys kicking around, and that would be a pretty huge blow to your eco, assuming you, like most people, heavily use the RAS preset out of the Quantum Gateway. So, you know, if you're using the RAS preset, you got 16 engineers or 16 SACUs with RAS sacrificing to build a GC, it's going to kill your economy by 160 mass per second, which is not an insignificant amount. And you could probably build a GC pretty quickly on that eco anyway. So I don't really think that this is a super viable way to build experimentals unless you literally have no other option. Like, there is a Monkey Lord on your doorstep and you have to build it now or you lose the game. Where I think this can make a little bit more sense is panic building PDs or SAMs, probably more so with surface-to-air missile systems. And specifically with SAMs, I think there can actually be some value here around panic building them. And really, the panic building functionality is mostly going to be used in a situation where maybe you're a T3 air player and your opponent gets a strat out really, really quickly. And you might be really strapped for mass or really strapped for energy because you're trying to get a T3P gen online. And you have to kind of make a choice between, like, okay, do I sacrifice like a good portion of my build power to build a SAM really, really quickly? Or do I just eat the cost on getting mexes destroyed, potentially my power grid destroyed, or all of them? So I think that in that particular instance, it makes a little bit more sense. Although you're still kind of pushing it because then you've blown like a good portion of your build power, which you need. So, you know, it's kind of like, do you prioritize build power over economy? Either way, I think that it makes a little bit more sense in that scenario. same is true for PD as well. Like if you've got an experimental coming in, a Cybercom teleporting, just like I said earlier, and you just need to get point defense up instantly, then that can be another good example. Although with point defense, you're going to need quite a few of them, and you'd have to micro all of the Tech 3 engineers, and that can also be somewhat APM taxing, which is again another reason why we probably don't see this that often. But all in all, as I wrap this up, is it a good mechanic? Sometimes. It's very niche. I really only think it makes sense in terms of the panic defense structure builds. By and large, I think it's a meme the rest of the time, but I wanted to cover it, go through some of the numbers associated with it. And with that really ends my very disorganized thoughts on this topic. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.